Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I'm Professor Hall, and we are going to talk about understanding the end of Jane Eyre. So, chapters 23 to 38. This is the last in our series. First, I did an overview of the first half of the book, or the first 2/3, rather, chapters 1 through 22. And then we looked at 5 things to know about the book structure and a little bit of this historical background, the point of view, and a few other things. Then we examined 5 major themes in the book. Then hopefully you read the whole thing. And then we talked about, I gave an overview of the end. And now we're going to look at understanding the ending and talking about some of the themes and other literary elements that are in that last third. And I just want to make a note here. I know you're probably not watching all of these in order because it's quite a bit, but I am recording them all in order, and I think I might be losing my voice a tiny bit. So I apologize for the coughing and if I get a little bit raspy. It's about, I think, 4 hours of recording all at once. So, but that's my Tuesday today. So let's get started. All right, the Entrapped Woman. Here is an illustration from one of the versions of the text. Bertha Mason is the person who has been rattling around Thornfield, making Jane believe that she was having some visions of a fiery woman blowing out a candle, ripping Jane's veil, setting Rochester's bed on fire. Now, I do want to say, this is not the only Gothic element in the story. So I find that sometimes students, and I even have to say I myself was sort of disappointed the first time I read the book. I was like, oh, it's just like a lady up in the attic. It's not like a ghost or anything. I kind of wanted it to be a ghost story. But there are still other supernatural elements that are not explained just by Bertha. So you do have that. But in The Mad Woman in the Attic, The Woman Writer and the 19th Century Literary Imagination. That was a book in 1979 published by Sandra Gilbert and Susan Guber, which examined Victorian literature from a feminist perspective. And in the work, they theorized that female writers in the Victorian times felt tension between being free through their writing and confined in other roles as women. So as a result, they created female characters. You know, we talked before about the foil and having people who are paired or people who are kind of opposites to each other in at least 1 or 2 major characteristics. So female characters who embodied the angel and the monster and kind of being opposed to each other. If you think about Helen, Helen is Jane's friend at Lowood School, and she's always described as angelic. Helen is almost pure spiritual reason. She's not emotional like Jane is. She's not passionate. She's just kind and calm and lovely. Bertha, on the other hand, is described as a creature, and she's really almost pure passion. There's no reason in her. She cannot talk. She snarls and jumps at people and attacks them. So scholars said that it also reflected men's tendencies to put women in these categories, either being pure and angelic or being unkept, rebellious, mad women. And not understanding fully insanity and mental illness, obviously. Although I would say that, many, sorry, I took a pause to add one more slide, which I'll show you guys in a second. But many people at that time really did not understand mental illness at all. And it's before Freud. Freud had a lot of horrible ideas, but at least his, the primary thing that he contributed to psychology is the idea of talk therapy, dialectical therapy, meaning that you talk about your problems and you kind of think about them and try to help solve them. And the idea that these were illnesses that could possibly be overcome. Before this, the, isolation was used as a therapy. This is a picture of people in isolation chambers to kind of calm them down in a mental facility, a mental health hospital. Other treatments, ice baths, again, to shock the person's system. Things like mercury pills, punishment, so a lot of use of negative reinforcement, and then other things that did help. If you had more money and you were going to a sanitarium, resting and doing art therapy, sometimes hypnotism a little bit later, positive reinforcement for getting better, all of those things. But the idea of the isolation, the question that I would ask, and that Jane sort of asks herself, but doesn't delve into as much, did the cure cause this, right? Was this somebody who was slightly mentally ill and then she was shut up in an attic for several years and that's why she went insane? And people, the Red Room incident at the beginning of the book is not that long, and it's pointed to quite a bit because it's one of those pairs of the book. It sort of foreshadows what Bertha has gone through. This is a room that Jane is thrown into because she is too passionate, and she goes insensible from fear and passes out. And if she had been treated that way and locked away for her passions, which you could do back then, you could send somebody to a mental institution because they had a physical deformity, because they were defiant of their husband, because they were gay. Those are things that happened. So if Jane had been sent to a place like that, and certainly she was sent to school later, but if she had been sent to a place like that where she didn't get any love, she didn't get any attention, could she have been like Bertha? I think that the parallel there is kind of clear. And it's almost sad to me that we get rid of Bertha so easily. But the book, The Wide Sargasso Sea, which is the retelling of Jane Eyre from different points of view, including Bertha's own, kind of goes into that in a little bit more detail. So if you're kind of interested in that, it's a fascinating book to read. So at any rate, with this book, The Mad Women in the Attic, looking at female authors sort of struggling with whether or not they want to be empowered, but they want to be ideal Victorian women, much of their work was criticized. But I think there are some patterns and themes in Jane Eyre that are prominent once Bertha is revealed. And I don't think that those authors are wrong. I think that that's something that women even today struggle with. We're going to look at another book that deals with things like weight loss and stuff. Do I conform to the ideal standards of beauty, or do I eat what I want? Right? Like that's sort of, can I have a piece of cake, or should I be on a diet to make myself look beautiful? In terms of how society views beauty, that's something that people struggle with. And that's something I think that these writers struggled with as well. But moving past that, some of the other patterns, here's a little excerpt. What it was, whether beast or human being, one could not at first sight tell. This is Jane seeing Bertha for the first time. It groveled, seemingly on all fours. It snatched and growled like some strange wild animal, but it was covered with clothing, and a quantity of dark grizzled hair, wild as a mane, hid its head and face. "Good morrow, Mrs. Poole," said Rochester. "How are you, and how is your charge today?" So Jane is like astounded by this, and you can see how Bertha, she's a human being, but she's not described in human terms. She's on all fours, crawling around the ground, growling. The hair is all over the place. She's covered in, she does have clothes, but she's hiding her head and her face. And Rochester is used to this and just talks to Mrs. Poole. "How are you, and how is your charge?" "We're tolerable," were tolerable, sir, I thank you, replied Grace, lifting the boiling mess carefully onto the hob. Rather snappish, but not rageous. So she's basically doing laundry. The boiling mess would be boiling laundry and putting it onto the thing to wash it and dry it. She's snappish, but she's not raging. So she's all right. It's not the worst day in the world. A fierce cry seemed to give lie to her favorable report. The clothed up hyena rose up and stood tall on its hind feet. Yeah, again, animalistic and like a creature, like a demon. Which angels and demons, there's a illustration of Jane with a veil, I guess unripped, and Rochester being attacked by Bertha and Mrs. Poole kind of looking on, and then Mr. Mason behind. Jane is an angel compared with this demon of a woman. When confessing his love to Jane, Rochester says, 10 years since I flew Europe half mad with disgust, hate, and rage as my companions. Now I shall revisit it, healed and cleansed, with a very angel as my comforter. So he looks forward to having his honeymoon with her. She is going to heal him. She's going to cleanse him. Those are words in the Christian faith showing forgiveness and coming back to God, or coming to God for the first time. He went before half mad with just passion and disgust. And now we realize that he went to Europe the first time to find a mistress because his wife was insane. So he felt like he had been forced into this marriage. She was the right station for them to be married. She had money. He had money. His father pushed for it. Her relatives hid her basically from him so that he saw her and he thought that she was beautiful, and they flirted and he was charmed by her, but he didn't know what her true nature was like. And that's why he went to Europe. And now he wanted Jane to almost redeem him like God would redeem him. By being the opposite of Bertha, by being kind and gentle. And she is someone who he does know her full nature. They've been friends for a while, and they've gotten to know each other over time. Later, Rochester recounts, Bertha Mason, the true daughter of an infamous mother, dragged me through all the hideous and degrading agonies which must attend a man bound to a wife, at once intemperate and unchaste. So at least part of this insanity is her intemperate. We have wild passions, possibly alcohol maybe in there, and unchaste. She is not the only person that he slept with, for sure. And back then, that would have been quite scandalous. So she's running around on him, or she had a lot of lovers before they met, and he thinks that that's hideous. It's degrading to him that he would marry such a loose woman, and now this is the person that she's become. And there's some indications too that her brother is also sort of sickly and not that bright, and kind of dumb and slow, and may also have this mental illness eventually overtake him because he's younger. And the infamous mother indicates that her mother may have been the same way. He calls himself a devil. Bigamy, that means marrying two women. Bi means two. Gamy refers to the sexual organs, but bigamy is such an ugly word. I meant, however, to be a bigamist, but fate has outmaneuvered me, or Providence has checked me, perhaps the last. I am little better. I'm sorry, guys. Let me try again. I am little better than a devil at this moment, and as my pastor there would tell me, deserve no doubt the sternest judgment of God, even to quench the fire and deathless worm. Quenchless fire and deathless worm. So basically talking about hell, again, the passions, fire, the deathless The deathless worm being Satan, the quenchless fires, the fires that never go out with water, the fires of hell. So yeah, the watch for this if you haven't read it yet, but if you have read it, think back about these images of the devil and angels and demons and creatures versus rational saintly people. So here he says, that is my wife. Such is the sole conjugal embrace I am ever to know. Such are the endearments which are to solace my leisure hours. And this is what I wish to have, laying his hand on my shoulder. This young girl who stands so grave and quiet at the mouth of hell, looking collectedly at the gambols of a demon. I wanted her just as a change after that fierce ragout. Woods and Briggs, look at the difference. Compare these clear eyes with the red balls yonder, this face with that mask, this form with that bulk. Then judge me. Yes, very strong words. And comparing Jane, who, interestingly enough, has been filled with passion like a demon earlier in the book, comparing her to an angel, and a quiet young girl with clear eyes and a beautiful face, and his eyes beautiful, standing at the mouth of hell, looking at a demon and not really knowing what to do. And the resentment here, that's the only embrace he would have had if he had acknowledged his wife, that's the only love he socially acceptably would have been able to know. Or his other option was to have a mistress who only cared about his money. And what a horrible trap for him to be in. He possibly is trying to take care of her by giving her a caretaker, by keeping her at his home. It's not like he's sent her away to the institution. So there is that as well to kind of consider and think about his point of view. So this pull between reason and passion, between the brain and the heart. Jane's passion tugs at her, but she struggles against. We had Helen before, ruled by reason and spirituality. And then we have St. John. So St. John prized his reason so highly that he denies his love for Rosamond, and eventually she marries someone who probably is more suitable to her, but it's very clear that she was in love with him as well. Rosamond's father is sort of, it seems possibly like they're kind of in the middle class, not quite aristocracy, but she and St. John, probably when they were children, people thought that they would get together. They get along, they flirt, they talk, they have kind, soft hearts for one another, but he doesn't believe that because she has a little bit more money than him, because she does like to have fun and go to dances and parties, because of those things, he begins to pursue Jane instead, teaching her the language, seeing how hard she can work, pushing her to really, really be a hard worker. And Diana and Mary are a little bit more balanced. The two of them want their brother to have a life in the town with them. They don't really, they admire him for his dedication, but they don't really want him to go away. And Jane is a logical match. He does not love her romantically, but he is pursuing her because he thinks she would be a good wife in that situation. So in contrast to Helen and St. John, Bertha is mad and filled with passion and free from reason. And it's kind of clear that Jane could have been like her. Confined in the Red Room, being driven mad by the ghost she perceived there. But she had balance because she was given love by Miss Temple, by Helen, by even when she came to Thornfield, by Mrs. Fairfax, friendship with her, and Mr. Rochester. She was able to get an education. She has faith. So She loves a man who married and misused his first wife, and she cannot tolerate that, and that's why she has to flee. But she's not so logical that she's heartless enough to marry St. John. And eventually she goes back to Thornfield out of the love she has for Mr. Rochester, and seeing his lowly state and the fact that his wife is no longer alive allows her to follow her heart. And it would seem through the supernatural signs that God is saying that that is now okay. So before we had the chestnut tree torn in two by the bolt of lightning, here we have the calling of Jane's name on the wind that somehow is carried to her through miles and miles and miles, that God allows her to hear, possibly. One is an omen of horror, and the other is a good omen, a sign that this will be okay. So we definitely have that balance. And the omens and visions, the coincidence of Jane finding shelter with relatives who've been searching for her, as I said, might seem ridiculous, but it really is a feature of Gothic literature. We're supposed to see some of these things as the sign of God's providence, which is his hand guiding events toward a positive conclusion. On the other side, there are still visions and dreams, and not everything has been caused by Bertha. So, the hand coming out of Jane's dream, I think at one point Jane has, I was going to say, I think it's here, but I don't know. But Jane has a dream of babies being snatched away from her. There are things like that that are not fully explained. So, foreshadowing that to the reader that something isn't right. The cracking of the chestnut tree, the rainstorm after they kiss, the injury to Rochester when he first sees Jane. He injures his ankle, and that's not a great sign. The torn veil, Jane's ability to hear Rochester calling out for her, all of these things kind of come together. And then we have the happy ending. The book has been said to challenge gender expectations as well as beliefs about social class structures. But really, as I mentioned, Jane is able to marry Rochester after he's been brought down and she's been kind of elevated by her inheritance. So there are others who also conform to expectations a little bit. Adele is forgotten and kind of sent away to school after Bertha is revealed. And again, after Jane and Rochester marry, Jane's too busy to be her governess, but at least she goes and gets Adele into a good school where the girl seems to thrive. And at the end, she's become a good companion to Jane, and she'll probably find a husband fairly soon. We see the troubles of Georgiana and Eliza, but Georgiana marries a wealthy man, possibly more for his money than for love. Eliza finds more comfort in the church. Mary and Diana both are happy and they marry well. John, who died a drunkard and an addict, a disreputable man, and then St. John finds his calling as a missionary. So again, these pairs that I think are quite important to the text. But most importantly, by the end, Jane and Rochester are in perfect accord. Their life is one of happiness and peace. They have both come through great trials. Jane was able to stay away from temptation and even was brought so low as to become part of what they would have called the underclass. She's homeless. She's impoverished. She has nothing. She's begging for food, but she was doing the right thing by not going away with him. Rochester has learned his lesson by trying to marry, and he was resigned to just living at Thornfield with his wife still locked up in the attic, I would guess. And he has now gone through his own trial of being blind, and then by the end of the book, he's starting to regain his sight. They have a family, and they're in love. And that's that. So that is kind of the end of Jane Eyre explained a little bit. just some of the plot points and also a few of the themes just revisited. I really hope that you guys enjoy this book. If you kind of like how the book is written, but you don't love this plot, a lot of people who feel that way end up liking Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte more. So that's something to think about. And if you liked this book, be sure to check out the read-alikes, the end of the first lecture, because why stop the fun? Keep reading things that are kind of like Jane Eyre. It's a great book. I can't wait to see your thoughts on it. And that's it. Have a great day.